Your mother means well, Kevin, but she's just not like my mom. My mom actually gets us. Lauren said it the way someone might comment on the weather light, offhand, already moving on to the next thing. She was spooning sweet potato puree into my granddaughter's mouth at the time, not even looking at me. Kevin laughed, low and easy, and reached across the table for another dinner roll. The same rolls I had driven 40 minutes to the bakery on Clement Street to get because Lauren mentioned, that she liked the sourdough ones with rosemary. I was standing at the counter cutting the lemon cake I had baked from scratch that morning. I set the knife down, slowly, picked it up again, finished slicing. I didn't say anything. I smiled when Lauren looked over for the plates. I handed my granddaughter a teething ring when she fussed. I poured coffee for everyone, including myself, and I sat back down at the table I had set 2 hours earlier while they were still getting ready upstairs. That night, after they left, after I had wiped the table and put away the leftover roast and washed every dish by hand, because the dishwasher was making a noise I hadn't gotten around to calling someone about. I sat in the kitchen with the lights low and both hands around my mug. The refrigerator hummed. The clock above the stove ticked. On the fridge door, held up by a magnet shaped like a sunflower, was a drawing my son had made in 2nd grade. A stick figure woman with yellow hair and a red dress standing in front of a yellow house with a crooked chimney. Underneath it, in the uneven handwriting of a 7-year-old, he had written, "My mom is the best mom." He gave it to me after a parent conference where his teacher said he'd drawn it during free period. He said he wanted me to have it because, and I still remembered his exact words, "So you always know." I looked at it for a long time that night. Then I got up, went to my desk in the back room, and opened my laptop. Not to do anything yet, just to look at a few things. I had been a school librarian for 31 years. I retired at 62, 2 years earlier than I'd planned, because my husband Robert's illness moved faster than the doctors expected. He passed 14 months after the diagnosis. Pancreatic cancer doesn't give you much time to argue. What it gave me, instead, was clarity. I learned quickly what mattered and what didn't, who showed up and who didn't, what was worth holding and what needed to be let go. Kevin was my only child. After Robert died, I think both of us leaned a little too hard into that fact. He had a good job, software development, at a mid-size firm in the city. He earned more in a month than I used to make in 3. Lauren worked part-time in marketing. From home, on her own schedule, they had a nice apartment in a neighborhood I could never have afforded at their age. They had Sophie, who was the brightest, most delightful 2-year-old I had ever seen, which I acknowledge is not an unbiased opinion. And for 2 years, quietly and without being asked twice, I had been filling in the gaps they didn't talk about out loud. The car insurance. Kevin had mentioned once, in passing, that the premium had jumped after a fender bender. I offered to cover it for a few months while they got back on their feet. That was 18 months ago. I was still paying it. My name was still on the policy. The phone plan. Kevin said it was easier if we shared a family plan. I was added. I paid. That was 3 years ago. The emergencies. After Sophie was born, Kevin asked if I could be a kind of backup, financially, just in case. He said it the way adults say things they're slightly embarrassed to ask. I said yes. I gave him the number to a credit card I kept with a low limit, specifically for things like a sudden medical bill or if the heat went out in the middle of January. He hugged me and said, "Thanks, Mom. We'd never actually use it." I want to pause here and say something clearly. I never helped them because I wanted credit. I helped them because they were my family and I was able to, and it felt like the right thing to do. Robert and I had always lived simply. We saved carefully. When he died, I inherited the house outright and a modest amount we had set aside over decades of careful living. I wasn't wealthy, but I wasn't struggling, and I knew what it was like to be young and stretched thin and too proud to ask for help in the right places. So I helped, quietly, without scorecards. What I didn't account for was Diane. Lauren's mother lived in Scottsdale. She had silver highlights she paid a great deal of money to make look natural, a wardrobe built around statement earrings, and a gift for arriving at the exact right moment, the moment after the hard part was over. When Sophie was born, I was the one in the waiting room at 11 at night after a long labor. I was the one who drove Kevin home at 2 in the morning so he could sleep before going back. I stocked their apartment with frozen meals for the first 2 weeks. I came every other day to hold the baby while Lauren slept. Diane arrived 10 days after Sophie was born. She brought a cashmere blanket from a boutique in Scottsdale and a bottle of champagne and a card that read, "You've always deserved this," Lauren cried when she saw her. Kevin put his arm around his mother-in-law and said she had perfect timing. I was in the kitchen washing bottles when he said it. For Sophie's first birthday, I planned the party. I made the invitations, ordered the cake, blew up 40 balloons by myself in the living room the morning of because the helium tank I'd rented ran out. I set up the folding tables, arranged the flowers, and organized the little favor bags. When Diane arrived, 45 minutes late with a giant stuffed giraffe and a bottle of Prosecco, every guest turned to look at her. She took 3 photos holding Sophie in front of the balloon arch I'd spent an hour building, and those were the photos that ended up framed on their mantle. I'm not bitter about that. I want to be clear about that. But I did notice, and I noticed the other things too. The way Lauren began CCing her mother on text threads I'd always been part of. The way Kevin started saying things like, "Diane thinks we should try that new pediatrician in Coal Valley," or "Diane suggested we look into this sleep training method." Diane, who lived 4 states away. Diane, who had been present for approximately 11% of Sophie's life. I tried to say something once. This is the part I want you to understand. I tried. In January, about 8 months before that dinner with the rosemary rolls, I sat down with Kevin at a coffee shop near his office. I told him I had been feeling a little invisible lately. I said it gently. I said I wasn't trying to compare myself to anyone, but that I'd noticed I wasn't being included the way I used to be, and I wanted to understand if I'd done something wrong. Kevin looked uncomfortable. He stirred his coffee. He said, "Mom, you're doing great. We're just really busy. Don't make this a thing." I said, "I'm not making it a thing. I'm telling you how I feel." He said, "You always do this. You take something small and make it a whole conversation." I didn't say anything after that. I paid for both coffees. I hugged him goodbye. I drove home and sat in my car in the driveway for a few minutes before going inside. I had been a librarian. I understood the importance of documentation. So when I got inside, I wrote the date in my journal and 3 words, "tried." Wasn't heard. 6 weeks after the dinner with the rosemary rolls, I was reorganizing my filing cabinet. Robert had always been the one who managed the finances, and after he died, I took over and developed my own system, which was thorough to the point of being slightly obsessive. Every receipt, every statement, every account linked to every other account, mapped out in a way I could follow without error. I was checking the emergency card account, the one I had given Kevin for genuine emergencies, when I saw it. Nashville Grand Hotel, $412. I stared at the number for a moment. Then I scrolled down. Rosé All-Day Wine Bar, $87. Broadway Honky Tonk Experience, Party of 2, $119. Spa at the Grand, $260. There were 6 charges over the course of a single weekend. The total was over $900. And underneath, in the memo line Kevin had apparently filled out when he made the reservation, it said, "Lauren's birthday getaway, so excited." I sat very still. I thought about the word emergency. I turned it over in my mind the way you turn over a stone to see what's underneath. Lauren's birthday. Not a medical bill. Not a heating emergency. Not a situation that couldn't wait until the next paycheck. A hotel in Nashville. Wine bars. A spa treatment. I scrolled further back. There were other charges I had noticed before but told myself were small things. A dinner I assumed was a work event. An Amazon order I figured was for... I had given them the benefit of every doubt. So many doubts. Stacked so neatly I hadn't seen the shape of them until right now. My chest felt tight, but my hands were steady. I got up and made a cup of tea. I stood at the kitchen window and watched the bird feeder swing in the February wind. A pair of finches landed and then left. I drank my tea slowly. Then I sat back down. I didn't call Kevin. I didn't write a long message. I didn't cry or slam anything or call my sister to vent. Instead, I opened my laptop and I made a list, quiet and methodical, the same way I used to catalog new acquisitions at the library. Every account that had my name on it, every payment that ran through my banking, every place my signature or my card number or my social security number had attached itself to their life like a silent, invisible foundation. The list was longer than I expected. Over the next 2 weeks, I made calls. I filled out forms. I mailed 2 certified letters. Each step was calm and deliberate, like turning off lights in a house you're leaving, not in anger, just because there's no reason to leave them on. The car insurance I removed myself from with 1 phone call. I spoke to a very pleasant woman named Carol, who confirmed that my name would be off the policy within 48 hours. The phone plan took 2 calls and about 40 minutes on hold. But it was done. The emergency card, I canceled the old one and opened a new account that existed only in my name with my address and no supplementary card holders. The apartment. That one took longer to understand fully. 2.5 years ago, when Kevin and Lauren were looking at apartments, their application had come back with a question about income verification. Lauren was just starting her part-time work. Kevin had only been at his company for 7 months and didn't have a long enough employment history to satisfy the landlord's requirement. I had offered, without being asked, to co-sign. I thought it was a temporary measure. I assumed Kevin would ask to have my name removed once he had more financial history, once they were more established. He never mentioned it again. When I pulled the lease document from my filing cabinet, my name was still there. First on the list, primary co-signer. I was responsible, on paper, for any unpaid rent, any damages, any lease violations. I sat with that piece of paper for a long time. Then I called the property management company and asked what the process was for removing a co-signer. The man I spoke to was straightforward. I would need to submit a written request, and unless Kevin and Lauren could qualify without a co-signer at that point, I would need to wait until the annual renewal period, which was coming up in 2 months. I wrote it on my calendar in pencil. Then I circled it in ink. I did not tell Kevin any of this. I had tried talking once. It had gone nowhere. And more than that, if I said something now, they would scramble to fix just enough to keep me attached. I knew how this worked. I had watched it happen to my own mother with my brother for years. This quiet gravity that kept her inside an orbit she hadn't chosen. I was 63 years old. I had buried my husband. I had raised a child alone for the last stretch of his growing up. I had worked 31 years and saved carefully and never asked anyone for anything I couldn't eventually give back. I was not going to explain myself into a corner and then apologize for the corner. The Saturday after I finished the last of the account changes, I drove to the garden center on the edge of town, the one Robert and I used to go to every spring. I bought 3 new rose bushes for the side yard, a bag of potting mix, and a small concrete bird bath I had been looking at for 2 years and always told myself was too much money. It was not too much money. I put it on my card. That afternoon, I planted the roses. My knees ached on the ground. I didn't rush. I turned the soil and worked in the compost and set each root in carefully, the way you're supposed to, not the way you do when you're trying to finish before someone calls you. No one called me. By the time I finished and had washed the dirt from my hands and was sitting on the back porch with a glass of water and the particular exhaustion that comes from doing something real with your body, the sun was already low and orange over the fence line. It was the most peaceful Saturday I'd had in longer than I could clearly remember. Kevin called on a Tuesday. I was on my way out to a watercolor class I had signed up for at the community center, something I had told myself I'd do for years and never made the time. He didn't say hello the way most people do. He said, "Mom, what is going on with the car insurance? Lauren just got pulled over, and the officer said our policy shows lapsed. She's freaking out." I sat down on the bench by the front door. "Is she all right?" "She's fine. Just a broken taillight. But they're saying our policy hasn't been active since last month. There must have been some kind of error." There wasn't an error, I said. A pause. What? I removed myself from the policy. In February, I sent a letter to you both, Kevin. I have the tracking number if you need it. Silence. You never mentioned that. You never asked. I could hear him breathing. Then, Mom, you can't just. We assumed that was handled. Lauren could have been cited. Sophie was in the car. I understand that's frightening, I said. And I'm glad they're both okay. But the insurance was in my name because of a situation from 18 months ago that was meant to be temporary. It was time for that to be in your names. You could have warned us. I sent a letter in February. I can resend it. Another silence, different quality this time, like something shifting underneath. Is this because of something? He asked, and his voice had changed, younger sounding, uncertain. Did we do something? I thought about that for a moment. I thought about the drawing on my fridge, and the coffee shop in January, and $900 in Nashville. We can talk about that another time, I said. Right now you need to call your insurance company and get a new policy set up. It's not complicated. You'll be fine. I hung up and sat with the phone in my hand for a moment. Then I picked up my purse, picked up my keys, and went to watercolor class. The instructor was a retired art teacher named Francis, who had painted seascapes for 30 years and had the patient, unhurried manner of someone who had long ago stopped trying to be anywhere she wasn't. We painted a mason jar with a single daisy in it. Mine was imperfect. The shadows were wrong, and the yellow went slightly outside the lines. I thought it was beautiful. That night, Lauren sent me a text. It was long. I read it once, carefully, the way I used to read difficult passages in books, slowly, without reacting, just taking in what was actually there. She said I was being passive-aggressive. She said she had always tried to include me, and I was pulling away for no reason, and it wasn't fair to Kevin or to Sophie. She said her mother would never do something like this, that her mother respected boundaries and didn't make everything a crisis. She said she didn't know what had changed in me, but it was making Kevin miserable, and she hoped I was proud of myself. At the bottom, she added, Sophie cried for you yesterday, and I didn't even know what to tell her. I set the phone down. I made a cup of chamomile tea. I went to the desk and opened my journal and wrote the date and one sentence. Document this. Then I went back to the phone, screenshot the message, emailed it to myself, and replied to Lauren with 5 words. I hope Sophie feels better. I forwarded the entire thread to my attorney with a short note. For file, no action needed yet. 2 days later, Kevin called again. This time, it was about the apartment. He'd gotten a letter from the property management company. It was the renewal notice, and it included a form for updating cosigner information. There was also a note that the existing cosigner, me, had submitted a request to be removed, effective at renewal. Mom, his voice was different this time, quieter. When did you do this? March, I said. I gave 60 days notice, which is what the lease requires. You can't, we might not qualify without you. You might not, I agreed. If that's the case, you'll need to look at your options. Your income has gone up significantly in the last 2 years, Kevin. You may qualify on your own now. And if we don't, then you'll figure something out. You're adults. You have good jobs. You'll figure something out. I could hear him sitting down somewhere, the sound of a chair. Then he said, very quietly, "Why are you doing this?" And there it was, that question. I had been waiting for it and dreading it, and also, I realized, needing it. Because I tried to talk to you in January, I said. Do you remember that? The coffee shop near your office. A pause. Yeah. You told me I was making something out of nothing. You told me not to make it a thing. He didn't answer. I have been paying your car insurance for 18 months past when it was supposed to be temporary. I have been on a phone plan with you for 3 years. My name has been on your lease since the day you signed it. I gave you a card for genuine emergencies. I stopped. Nashville isn't an emergency, Kevin. A long silence. How did you? He stopped. Started again. That was Lauren's birthday was really hard this year. She was struggling. We just needed. I understand that people have hard seasons, I said. I buried your father. I know what a hard season looks like. What I needed during my hard season was for my son to show up. Not money, just to show up. He was quiet for a long time. I let the quiet be what it was. I didn't know you felt like that, he finally said. I told you in January. Another pause. Then, I know you did. Outside my kitchen window, one of the new roses I'd planted had opened overnight. I hadn't expected it so soon. The nursery tag said to wait 4 to 6 weeks, but there it was. Small and coral-colored and slightly tilted toward the light. I love you, I said to my son. That's not the question. The question is whether that love has to mean I disappear into the background of your life and exist only when something needs to be paid or fixed or managed. He said nothing, but I heard him exhale, the kind of exhale that means something landed. I'm not asking you to choose between me and Lauren or between me and Diane. I'm not interested in those kinds of competitions. I never was. I paused. What I'm asking is to be a person in your life, not a utility. I let him think about that. I'm going to let you go, I said. Let me know what you decide about the lease. You have time. After we hung up, I stood in the kitchen for a while, not doing anything in particular, just being in the quiet. Then I took down the second-grade drawing from the fridge. Not in anger, I just held it for a minute, looking at the uneven letters and the yellow house with the crooked chimney. I put it in a frame I'd had sitting empty on the bookshelf for 2 years and set it on the mantel in the living room, where I could see it from my reading chair. It looked better there. The watercolor class met again on Thursday. Frances brought in a new subject, a collection of old keys she'd arranged on a piece of dark cloth. She said keys were a good subject because they had weight in the imagination. They carried meaning beyond their shape. She said the goal wasn't to make a perfect key. The goal was to paint what a key feels like to hold. I thought about that for most of the class. I was working on the shadow under the largest key, an old brass skeleton key that reminded me of the one my mother kept on a hook by the back door when I was growing up. When my phone buzzed on the table beside my easel, a text from Kevin. Mom, can we come for dinner this Sunday? Just us. I want to talk. I looked at it for a moment. Frances came by, tilted her head at my painting, and said, Your shadows are getting better. More trust. I smiled. I set the phone face down on the table and went back to the key. I answered Kevin's message on my way to the car afterward. Sunday works. I'll make pot roast. Tell Lauren to bring Sophie early so I can have her to myself for a little while before dinner. He replied with a single word. Thank you. I drove home with the windows down. It was a warmer evening than March usually allowed, the kind that felt like a small apology from winter. I stopped at the grocery store for the carrots and the pearl onions and the good stock I used for the roast. While I was in the produce aisle, I ran into a woman I knew from the library, a retired teacher named Patricia, who had moved to the neighborhood a few years ago. We talked for a while about nothing consequential, her granddaughter's dance recital, the new cafe that had opened on the corner, the roses. You have a good face tonight, Patricia said, before we parted. I had a good class, I said. What are you learning? Watercolor, I said, still figuring it out. She smiled. Best way to learn something. I went home. I put away the groceries for Sunday's dinner. I watered the roses in the side yard, the coral one and the 2 others that were still just tightly wound buds, promising but not yet open. Then I made a small dinner just for myself, a fried egg and some toast and the last of the good soup I'd made earlier in the week, and I ate at the kitchen table with a book open beside my plate and the radio on low in the other room. My husband Robert used to say that the best evenings were the ones that didn't need to be anything. No occasion, no agenda, just a person in a room they chose, doing something they wanted. I thought about him. I thought about the 34 years we had, and the way he used to fall asleep in the armchair with a book still open on his chest, and the sound of him in the kitchen early in the morning. I thought about how he always said I was the strongest person he knew, and how I always told him he was wrong, and he always said, I'll be right, eventually. I missed him, but I was okay. That was the thing I hadn't quite understood, I think, until recently, that those 2 things can be true at the same time. That you can carry grief and still be okay. That you can love someone with your whole heart and still need to protect something in yourself. that taking up space isn't the same as taking something from someone else. I turned off the radio and washed my single dish and dried it and put it back in the cabinet. I went to the living room and sat in my reading chair and looked at the framed drawing on the mantel for a while. My mom is the best mom. The letters were still uneven. The house still had a crooked chimney. The stick figure woman still stood in front of it with her yellow hair and her red dress and her arms slightly too long, like she was reaching for something just outside the frame. I left the lamp on and went to bed earlier than usual. Through the window, I could see the edge of the yard, the dark shapes of the rose bushes, and beyond them, just at the top of the fence, the first pale suggestion of stars. Sunday came bright and cold in the way of early spring mornings that haven't quite decided what they want to be. I had the pot roast in the oven by 9. By the time my son's car turned into the driveway at noon, the house smelled like onions and herbs and something warm. Sophie came through the door first, unsteady on her feet and grinning with all the confidence of someone who has recently learned to run and not yet learned what falls feel like. I caught her before she made it 3 steps and held her against my shoulder, and she patted my cheek with a small open hand and said, "Nana." And that was, as it had always been, the most complete sentence in the world. Lauren came in behind her, quieter than usual, hands in her coat pockets. We looked at each other. "Thank you for having us," she said. "Thank you for coming," I said. And I meant it. Kevin came in last, carrying Sophie's bag and a bottle of wine he'd clearly grabbed from somewhere nice. He handed it to me and said, "We don't need to make this a big thing. I wanted to say it in person." He looked at me, the way he hadn't looked at me in a long time, really looked. "I'm sorry, Mom. For a lot of things. We both are." Lauren nodded, not looking at the floor. Looking at me. Sophie squirmed to get down and toddled immediately toward the rosebush painting I'd done in class that was drying on the counter. I intercepted her gently. "Let's eat first," I said, "and then we can talk." We ate. The roast was good. Sophie ate half a dinner roll and 3 bites of carrot and then fell asleep against Kevin's arm before the table was cleared. Kevin carried her to the couch and tucked my old knit blanket around her and came back looking like the 7-year-old who had written those uneven words and stuck them to my fridge to keep me company. We talked for a long time, not about everything, not that day, but enough. That evening, after they left, after the dishes were done and the leftover roast was put away and the house had settled back into its quiet, I sat on the back porch in the old wicker chair with a cup of tea cooling in my hands. The coral rose had opened another layer since morning. In the dusk, it looked almost pink. I thought about the word foundation, how it usually describes the thing that goes underground, invisible, holds everything up, without being seen, how that can be a kind of strength, how it can also be a kind of loss. I was still here. I was still my son's mother. I was still Sophie's grandmother. Those things didn't have a price, and they didn't need one. But I was also something else now, something I was still learning to name. A woman in a house she had made her own. A student of watercolor who was getting better at shadows. A gardener who had planted 3 rose bushes in February, not knowing which ones would open first. The tea had gone cold. I didn't mind. I stayed on the porch a while longer, listening to the neighborhood settle into evening, a dog somewhere, a screen door, the first uncertain notes of whatever birds were still awake. No one needed anything from me right now. And in the space that left behind, I found exactly what I had been looking for without quite knowing I was looking. Myself. Still here. Still whole. I went inside when the stars came out, and I slept well.